Hi, welcome to Damn Fools. I'm Mike, and this is the Beard of Empathy. This is a show where we talk about deconstruction from religion and its impact on mental health, and the impact that mental health has on that deconstruction. Today, I'm talking to Jake. Jake's going to share his story with us. How you doing, Jake?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for joining me today. As always, before we can talk about deconstruction, we have to talk about construction. Like, what is some of your religious background? Fill us in.
So I was pretty much born in the King James only part of the IFB religious background. So we were kind of the Peter Ruckman variety. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but we were followers of
Can't say
Peter
yes.
Ruckman. So yeah, we were Ruckmanites, is what we were known as. And I pretty much grew up on the Bible. I learned to read at a very young age. I was 3, and I learned to read on the King James Bible. So I was very smart from a young age and raised studying the King James. And some of the earliest memories that I have is of my dad taking my brother out to street preach. And so that's kind of just to not get into too much of the nitty gritty of it. We pretty much, believed in the King James version of the Bible, and we're young Earth creationists, and that was kind of our background. We started out very strict. I remember that, like, my brother and I weren't allowed to wear shorts because showing the thigh was like nakedness. So that was like no bueno. My sister had hair down past, her middle back. And so we were like ultra strict. I didn't have a TV in our house until I was probably around 10 years old. I think was the first time that we bought a TV. And so we were very, very, very strict. I remember my mom made these cards, and that we called them no cards. And we used to recite, no, 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 I will not take drugs. And there would be, images cut out from magazines of various types of drugs, or no, 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 I will not wear modern clothing. And it was, pictures of just various, JC Penney catalog cutouts in there. But we would go over and we would like recite this, every day. So we started out very, very strict. And then eventually over time, as I got a little bit older, we started to go to churches that weren't as like stringent on the doctrine, and some things started to relax. And then it wasn't till around, I'd say, like high school, that my parents finally kind of like let the grip go a little bit and let us do more normal things. I was homeschooled until 10th grade. So 10th through 12th, I went to a public school, but everything before that was homeschool. So very, very deeply indoctrinated.
What was that transition like from the homeschool to a public school?
It was not good. It was very culture shock. I started out, just trusting everybody, just assuming that everybody was like the people that went to my church. Not that they were much more trustworthy people, but just that expectation that people are like me, and then learning that, oh no, and people are not like me at all.
In your church, it was an insulated society, and you trusted everybody
Right.
because you saw them all the time. Whether they were actually trustworthy or not, you learned to trust them because they were part of your in-group, you know,
Correct. Yeah.
and just never had any assumption or was never given the assumption that people were any other way outside of that.
Yeah, so it was a shock to kind of explore the world, and to not have that shelter of always being at home. And when we weren't at home, we would go to the chapel that was associated with the Christian church, that or the Christian school rather, that was associated with some of the Christian churches that we associated with. So normally, if we were outside of the house, that's where we were. We were in some sort of church function. So going from that to being in a public school where my parents couldn't shelter me from just the regular world, it was pretty shocking at first. But I was always a very balanced person, though, oddly. I started out when I was really young. I had a really outgoing personality. I probably would have been a theater kid if that was allowed. I was always making up stories, and then an event occurred, and I witnessed some abuse, and it slowly kind of took that part of my personality away, and I became more quiet, but not always. I was very I never had a filter. I always spoke my mind, and that got me into a lot of trouble, especially in religion where you're not supposed to question things. But I never really consider myself a believer because I never had that experience. Like my parents had a conversion experience where they were not Christian, and then they had a conversion. I didn't really get that. I was born into it. And so I was just told things, and I was very black and white in how I viewed things. I was very logical in how I approached things. And so I was just believe them as fact. It's not, I don't believe in gravity. Gravity is just a fact of nature. And so that's kind of how I was introduced to the religion. And it was always something that I just took as being fact. And I didn't really question it or initially or, push back on it. It was just something that I was told, but it wasn't something that I really believed in. It was just my worldview, I guess.
It was impressed on you from an early age and talked about as if it was just straight fact, like brute fact of the universe.
Yeah.
This is what it is. And you had no reason to question that.
Yeah, and I do remember some of my earliest memories too being fears of things like Catholics and the Catholic Church. Just growing up, reading Fox's Book of Martyrs, I had no context that that was, something that happened hundreds of years in the past because I was very smart from a very young age, and so I picked up on a lot of things that I don't think my parents really understood that I was like mature enough to grasp. And so I do remember being afraid of Catholics, specifically like nuns, and being worried that I was going to be persecuted for the beliefs that we held, and for it, taking a while to understand that, oh, these are things happened, long in the past. I remember the first time that I learned about space and the moon and how we went to the moon, it immediately created a conflict with me because when I read the story of the Tower of Babel, I took it very literally, and it seemed very odd to me. It really didn't portray the God that I was taught about. It was a God that was afraid of his creation. It was a God that had a lot of reservations about the things that he did, not a God that was like all knowing and all powerful, and a God that didn't understand science, which was really odd to me because when I was taught things that were factual, I just believed them as such. And so I remember that was a real problem where I was struggling to contemplate. I had to readjust everything as to where heaven is, where hell is, how that related to earth, and just thinking about how God was afraid that these people are going to build a tower. And I remember just thinking about like why God was worried. Like, surely God would know that they'd run out of space. There's not enough bricks to do that. And even if they had enough bricks, the air is going to get thin and they're not going to be able to breathe the air. They're going to pass out way before they get there. Plus, we've been up there and that's not where he's at. So, like, I couldn't really grasp why he was concerned, but
The Tower of Babel story is one of the ones that I think actually, to me, has one of the most hopeful sentiments in it of any of the stories in the Bible. And that's when God says, if I don't confuse their language, there's nothing they cannot do if they work
oh, yeah.
together. So I love that idea. Like just human beings working together, there's nothing we can't do, nothing we can't understand.
Yep.
And I think that's hopeful. The problem is the Bible just goes, no, that's a bad thing. We have to
Right.
take it away.
Yeah, and I picked up on that as a child even, and it seemed odd that God was punishing these people for working together. And, that's something that we're taught that, we're supposed to share our things and we're supposed to, work together for common goals. And then you read this story and that they're doing this, they're genuinely trying to seek knowledge. And it wasn't even like a prideful thing. And it really was like baffling to me to like understand why this God would want to punish these people for doing something like that.
In the Genesis story and a lot of the earlier stories, the God isn't all powerful. He's not all knowing.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
And he's scared of things because the gods of the ancient world were all like that. The Greek pantheon, the Egyptian pantheon, they all had humanistic attributes. They
Yeah.
they were flawed. It wasn't
That
until later that they started getting piling more and more on top of that.
and that's actually one of the first memories that I had from going to high school, and that transition is, I corrected somebody, when they were talking about the medical symbol with the snakes and the pole, and,
Goodness.
Yes, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's from Moses," and they were like, "No, no, this is from Greek culture," and I was like, "Oh, no, 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 I'm sure this is from Moses in the Bible," then and told the story and was very embarrassed to learn that no, that in fact, it was from Greek culture originally, and that's probably how it ended up in there.
From a very strict sect of KJV only Christians, homeschooled and indoctrinated with a lot of things that were forbidden about things. I think it's always interesting to me the kinds of things that are forbidden by different sects, like the Amish and Mennonite sects, like nothing technological past a certain point. Like butter churn, fine. Stereo, no. And I find it interesting that it was like television. Like, what is wrong with television? Like, where's the problem there? And different sects have different answers for that.
Yeah, we definitely got wrapped up into, the, satanic panic of that time period. I do remember that, and, my mom was actually raised Roman Catholic, and she had 4 brothers and 3 sisters, and her youngest, there's a further age difference between my mom and I than my uncle and me, so he was in a band, he was a drummer, and that was always a big no-no was rock and roll. That was definitely Satan, and music was very satanic, and that was having come out of it, that's something that I really was kinda glad. My uncle lived with us quite a few times, and so I was introduced to a lot of music through my uncle that I wouldn't have known about otherwise. So there's just little ways, where things get in, but that was their whole contention with TV is that, it's the world getting in and us not separating ourselves from the world, and there's, so much temptation on TV, and so that it was just that kinda outside influence, I think, was our main contention with it. We actually had a computer monitor and a VCR, and so occasionally we would, go on, like, Friday nights and rent movies, but they were usually Disney movies or TV shows from the Disney Channel, things that were, like, for whatever reason, that was appropriate and okay, so that was one of the small things that we got a little pop culture.
Odd because most of the Disney movies have magic and things in them.
Yeah, I always wondered about that when we got a little older, and then Lord of the Rings was the thing that, that was fine. Lord of the Rings was okay, and, of course, anything that was, C.S. Lewis and Narnia and all that was totally fine, but I kinda wondered once Harry Potter started to be a thing, what the difference was, why is this magic okay and that's not? Oh, because this guy said it was an allegory for Christ, I guess.
Narnia is okay because the author was devoutly Christian and the whole themes are Christian based, and everybody knows that. But, Harry Potter, that's witchcraft and wizardry. Just that word alone, witchcraft. There's no witchcraft in Narnia, except for in the witches, which are the bad people.
And that always seemed to be a concept that we grasped well, even as children. Even the magic that was in the Disney films. It was easy to understand who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And it's funny that they don't trust you to be able to do that for other things. But yeah, I went through high school and I learned to read when I was 3. So my mom put me in school when I was really young. So I ended up being in the same grade as my older brother, and, he was a year older than me, and so we stayed in the same grade until I graduated high school. I was 16, and then he went to Bible college, and my sister went to Bible college. They tried that out, but I just did it just didn't seem like something for me. So I ended up, moving in with my aunt and uncle, moving out of state, and I was supposed to go and help my cousin who was also raised in the same religious background, but he had been getting into trouble, and, so I ended up kinda getting out and having, like, a mini deconstruction, where I was finally out of my parents' house and felt like I was, more like an adult and experimented with some things, experimented with drugs and alcohol and things like that, but didn't get into any, trouble, just stuff that you do when you're a kid. And it was crazy because it's like I started to kind of see the world in a different way. I started to really realize, especially my first experience with with marijuana was crazy. I was always told these things growing up about how, you're going to be around people, they're going to pressure you, you're going to just get all of this peer pressure to want to do these things. And we were just hanging out and somebody lit up a joint and it went around the circle and it got to me and they said, "You want some?" And I said, "No, I'm good." And they went, "Okay," and passed it on to the next person.
Right.
And it was not that experience at all. It wasn't what I was expecting. And it came around again and they just passed
Especially
it right by me the second time, didn't even ask.
especially in programs like DARE and things like that, it was they much like that. They blew it way out of proportion. They're gonna do this. You're gonna have to have it before you can leave this
Mm.
room. You gotta have you did this like, and it's never like that. Like not
Nope.
ever. Hey, you want to say?
And then
Oh, okay. Look,
by the third time it came around, I was like, "Hey, I don't think I have as much to worry about as I thought." And I tried it out and everything was fine. I didn't die. And that was kind of another time where I think the deconstruction kind of really started where it was like, oh, some of the things that I've been told aren't accurate to the way that the world actually operates. These are things that I was told to keep me in line. And the crazy thing is that what got me that time was guilt. The whole concept that guilt comes around. I remember that I had an issue at work, and I was in a union, and they talked to me about something that had happened, and that guilt process just starts to work in your head where you go, "Oh, this is because I tried this. I tried marijuana for the first time. This has gotta be why this is happening." And it ended up turning out okay. They I basically told them, "I have a drug problem and I need to go to rehab," and they let me, go back home to my home church, because my pastor's wife was a certified counselor, and so they said, "Okay, if you do, essentially a rehabilitation program with her, then we'll let you come back without any penalties to your job." So I took about a month off and went down there and did some counseling. And that was my first experience with any kind of mental health acknowledgement in the church. There was a series called Lifetime Guarantee. Bill Gillum was a doctor, I believe. Bill Gillum was the author, and it was the first kind of real mental health advice that it was wrapped up in the religion, but
mm.
a lot of it I remember to this day was very sound about just how people in relationships work and how how your emotions kind of go up a lot quicker and stay up a lot higher than when your reason is at, and you can peak emotionally and take that long time for that to come back down, and it's a lot easier to go back up to peak. And it was a lot of talk about how you get to that point and and what types of people that you're around, and how, like, if your mom is a rattlesnake and your dad is a tarantula, your 10 is going to be a lot different than somebody else's 10. And so what your tolerance is to be able to accept things that are emotionally keying is going to be a lot different. And so a lot of those aspects of it, I think, were very sound for being religious based mental health. But it
So
kind of gave me that first experience.
some information on just kind of grounding out things and how reactivity works, especially emotional reactivity versus logic and reason. Like logic and reason take a lot of mental energy. They take a lot of focus
Yeah.
for us to use. They're very, very powerful tools, but it takes focus. Emotions are very reactive, and we become reactive to them. If we let them, they will control how we behave rather than our rationality. Once you become aware of how increased or heightened your emotions can be, that's when you can start learning how to
Mhm.
manage them.
But yeah, so I did that, went back to work, and then 9/11 happened, and I was working in the airline industry, so I lost my job. Right about that time, I met my wife, and she was somebody who I had reconnected with a family that I had known when I was a child. And the dad of the family ended up being a pastor at a church. And so I started to visit the church and ended up meeting my wife there. But she was somebody who had converted, that was a friend of one of his daughters. So she was somebody who hadn't been raised in that background, but It's crazy how quickly she kind of like adhered to everything. The guilt for her really impacted her very quickly, where she changed complete aspects of her personality, her behavior, her appearance, to comply with what was being asked. But I'm not sure if you're familiar with chick tracks.
Not entirely. I think I
All right.
vaguely know the term, but
Yeah, so they're just little cartoon booklets by this guy Jack Chick, that ironically, he found that the Nazis, during Hitler's youth time period, they would use comics to get people to propagandize children into
yeah.
the Nazi cult. And so this guy thought that would be a great idea for Jesus and and to get people to be Christians. So he literally picked up a tactic directly from the Nazis, and it's very effective, unfortunately. But they, that will have some sort of salvation message in them, and will have some sort of moral message. But there's one about a guy who was a biker, and it was called Bad Bob. It was one of the more popular ones, but that's supposedly this preacher was who that was based on, and he's kind of a notorious guy. He came from a Detroit biker gang, and had a conversion experience, and then became this evangelical preacher. But I ended up meeting my wife there at that church, and I started to realize very quickly that it it was not a place that I wanted to be. It just a lot of very like racist and like outwardly racist ideas. And so we ended up getting our first experience of that again, more of that like church guilt, where we lived in a different town when we first got married, and it was our church wasn't local anymore, and we believed that the church should be local, that you should be contributing to your neighborhood, to your people, your community. So we just told them, that we felt that God was wanting us to go to this other church in the town that we lived in, and of course, God told him differently. He doesn't want you to leave, so. And he's closer to God, so his opinion would be more valid than mine would be. But yeah, so we ended up leaving that church and going to a church that was local to where we live. And we just kind of went along. We waited about 5 years after we got married before we started having kids, which was awesome. That's not common in the religion that I grew up in. You pretty much start having kids immediately, like on your honeymoon, preferably.
There's not already one in the oven.
And we thought it would be smart to just wait a little bit, so we waited. We had found a church. We had moved out to Arizona, and found a church out there that was a mission to the Indian people on the reservation, and just started going to that church and trying to contribute. It was kind of weird experience. When I finally quit going to church, I just woke up one Sunday and just didn't feel like it was a place for me. It was very sudden. Like it didn't there was no church hurt. There was nobody did anything to me that made me angry at members of the church or anything like that. I just woke up one day, and it just didn't feel like it was a place that I belonged. And I've been very active. I would travel with the church, w- uh, with the youth group. I always was able to talk to teens really easily, and a lot of self-deprecating humor, usually gets you on their level, and so I was trying to get involved in that. I had wanted to do mission work. My family is from a little island in the Mediterranean called Malta. It's actually very significant in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul shipwrecks there, and I had had a heart for the Maltese people because it's one of the most devout Catholic nations in the world. But it's very small place, but you go to a different Catholic church every day of the year, not hit the same one twice. And so I wanted to free them of, their obviously false religious beliefs. And I had talked
Catholic.
to, yeah, yeah.
Damn Catholic, says Dan Catholic. I can say you're probably right to have been afraid of the Catholic Church. The church itself has done some very terrible things and continues to always so. Catholics themselves, I meet them on an individual level.
Mhm. That was something too that, it's actually a hallmark of the IFB religion is that we have all the dirt on all the other religions. I always joke that if you wanna know about a religion, you'd wanna ask a Baptist because they can tell you about everybody else's. So I ended up, talking to our pastor about wanting to be a missionary to my people, and, he was just very discouraging. It was very much like, I don't think this is for you. This isn't something that you wanna do." And being in a church where your pastor is sent out as a missionary, you would think that they would, be very helpful and encouraging, but they weren't, and I kind of was, like, resigned to just being in the church and just doing my service there in the church, and, I had even gone out with the youth group to visit a major, IFB, Bible college in California, out in Lancaster, California, and that was an experience for me too that was just very unique. I'd always had a problem with, merchandising off of religious beliefs, and I always thought the gospel should be free, and it should be something that you wanna tell people about, not something that you would charge them for. And just seeing how polished everything was at this Bible college and how much they were charging kids to learn about God's word, it was very disheartening. I remember getting back when normally when I would get back from these things, I would feel refreshed and that you'd have this vigor that you would wanna go and, serve the Lord, and I got back and I just remember being very disappointed by everything, and I don't think it was very long after that. It was maybe within a month that be very upset with my decision to not go, and she didn't fight me. She has always been a very reasonable person. I've always been able to reason with her very easily, and when I eventually sat down and talked to her about how I was feeling, she thought that that sounded reasonable, that seemed like a good reason to not go to a place anymore, and, that was actually a really interesting part of her deconversion story is that she would go back to church and they would tell her, "Oh, we're praying for Jake. We're really praying for him." And she would be like, "What? Why? What praying for him for what? Like, what? Do you think that he's out shooting heroin and banging hookers? Like what is it? Like, he's the same person. Like, he didn't change who he was, but it's just like automatically, if you're not going to church, you're not right."
Giving
And
up
so
on
that
church, it means you've given up on God.
Yeah, and so that's just the default position. So that's just automatically, she's going to be in this place where she, needs prayer for her husband. And that was something that I think was kind of eye opening for her, where it's like, oh, that their opinion can change on you very quickly and based on nothing at all, just how they feel based on what they were told, because a book said these very convenient things
Right.
that you would say to somebody to try to keep them from leaving your cult, basically. So
It's almost like that book has been used as a manual for manipulation for 2,000 years.
absolutely. And I think that's a big part. Just looking back on it, I was a very smart kid. I could figure things out pretty easily. I had problems because we were not, there was no alcohol in the Baptist faith, and I remember being King James only. You can't change any of God's word. If one jot or one tittle gets changed, then you're blotted out of the book, and so that's like a big deal. And I remember reading scripture about wine and there's scripture about, who can be a leader in the church, who can be like a deacon or, and it says, somebody who's not a striker, somebody who doesn't fight, someone not given to much wine. And I remember reading that and going, okay, you can't, you can't tell me that this is not alcohol. And then that it's very plainly saying, hey, just be careful.
It doesn't say no wine, it says little
Correct.
wine.
Correct. And
Moderation.
there's Right, all things in moderation. That was a big thing, and I think that kinda carried me through when I would see a lot of the blatant out in your face bull. I would just kind of settle in on all things in moderation was my one of my, like, epithets that you could just kinda go back to, and all things in context. That was very important to me that you put things in context and that you understand what a scripture is trying to say. And that I think is one of the issues that I had with being in the King James only part of the IFB cult is that they really get you to, there's a lot of things that they do to get you to not get any outside knowledge, where the books come from, what translations are used. There's very distinct. That's why when I started, I said we were Ruckmanites. That was part of that sect. A lot of times you were either a Ruckmanite or you were Jack Hyles person, but it all tied back to specific sects and specific beliefs about the Bible. And it just bothered me that, you're not supposed to change one thing, but you're going to convince me that wine isn't wine all of a sudden, that this is grape juice, and that they had this capability back then to, like by default, your grapes are going to turn into wine. They didn't really have refrigeration. There was not really a way, like, grape juice is a modern invention, and now you're trying to convince me that this thing existed back in a time when it couldn't have existed.
It was a common drink. Everybody drank wine. Right.
Yeah, and it was little things like that where I started to realize that, oh, my own morality and my own view of things doesn't line up with theirs. But when you're when that's your whole world, that's the only thing that you know, it's really hard. I think that was the hardest part for me in the deconstruction process, was breaking away that identity piece. When I finally got to that point where I quit going, I still hadn't gotten to the point where I was an atheist. There was still about a decade of time between there. But by the time that I left, I was already very libertarian in my beliefs. I was very confused about a lot of things. I didn't understand why the people that I went to church with were so gung ho on rights and the Constitution. I don't see individual liberty and freedom in the Bible anywhere, especially not in the Old Testament. It's very much give up yourself to another, greater being than yourself. And so it was really weird that these people are so gung ho for their rights when that's not really the message in the Bible. And then I kept seeing things in the Old Testament. There's a emphasis on reparations, on when the father sins, that it will go on to the third and fourth generation. And it was really weird that, like, they were very against reparations for things like slavery, which
Right.
that seemed very scriptural. That to me, that seemed like a very biblical view that you would have
Yeah.
if you believed the things that you read.
It
Uh,
applies to everybody but me. Right?
yeah,
It always
yeah,
applies to everyone but me. You wrong me, that should go for 3, 4 generations. What do you mean my grandfather owned slaves, not me. I didn't do it. Like, don't put that on me. That was my grandfather. I don't know, like, you can't have it both ways. You can't hold other people responsible for 3 or 4 generations, but you're not responsible for anything? I
yeah.
throw that entirely out. Everybody's responsible for their own stuff. I'm no more responsible for my father than he is actually for me.
Yeah, little things like that I started to just see on my own and just realize that I had a different belief than some of the other people that were around me. But I just remember just reading different things, and just I would just see different things in it than they would see. It was really weird. It really bothered me that King David is seen as a man after God's own heart. That was something that was always described, that he was a friend of God. He was one of God's true friends who was a human being, and he was a man after God's own heart. And then you read the story of Bathsheba, and you get this completely different story. When I would read it, I would see this peeping Tom creep guy that's creeping on a lady that he shouldn't be, and then he uses his power and influence to basically take advantage of her. You can't consent. You cannot consent to a king. So when somebody has that kind of authority over you, there's no way to say no. So I don't know how you view that any other way. And then he has the woman's husband murdered. He intentionally sends him to the front lines of a war, has him killed off. And then you get a story that it gets worse. She's pregnant. She has a baby. God's not really against abortion. He just, his abortions happen after the kid is born. So he told David, his punishment for this thing, I'm gonna punish a third party for some reason. I don't know why that baby had to get punished for something that King David did. But,
And then he punishes 10 other parties as well.
oh, absolutely. But that God aborts that baby. That's the only way to describe that. It's a full-on life that was born, and God ended it. And then you would get these additions that I just didn't read in the story. That's where the concept of all babies go to heaven when they die comes from, because in that story, it's mentioned that David is sorrowful, and God or the prophet tells him that you don't have to, just have the normal grieving period, and then you'll see the baby one day in heaven. And it's like that. I read that in context, and in context, that had to do with him and that one baby. It didn't apply to everybody, and that was when I really started to deconstruct, was when I started to go, okay, where did these doctrines come from? How did these doctrines get in there? I know that, I shared beliefs with other religious faiths, but the one specific that I grew up with, how did those get in there? And then I started going down a path. I don't know if you've heard of the YouTuber Wendigoon. He does a lot of like myth, like cryptozoology type myths, but he is a believer. And so he would do videos about like scripturally accurate angels. So he would go through and describe what an angel is according to the Bible. Yeah, yeah, with 78 eyes, or and rings and
Siphons, wings, just all
yeah.
the body, like, what? The people describing this were using something in the mold or mushroom family
Oh
they're
yeah.
describing.
That's and he started to do some more in-depth videos on things like Satan and where Satan and hell comes from. And, it was something that kind of always bothered me, because we were raised to believe that, Peter was crucified upside down on a cross. That's how he was martyred, and that's how he died. But that story is only in a part of the Bible that's not canon for Baptists.
Right.
It's in the Apocrypha.
Oh, the apocryphal.
It's not in any of the accepted texts. So I don't know why King James only people are accepting that as being just a fact of, history.
Interestingly, some of the ideas that people espouse, especially about Satan, are more from Milton than they are Paradise Lost, than they are from the
Yeah, Faust. Yep, a lot of Faust gets in there,
yeah.
and that's kind of what he went through in some of these videos. He went into a lot of depth, and then I started to go into that, and we always used the Schofield Reference Bible. That was like a big thing, and I started looking into Schofield, and that guy was a charlatan, and he was probably one of the biggest proponents of Zionism in America. He kind of really pushed that whole idea, and got that into the churches in America. And it was interesting because I always could apply that to other religious cults. I there was always an L. Ron Hubbard. There was always a Joseph Smith. There's always a Muhammad. There was always a guy, and I think I failed to apply that on my own, because I always missed the mark. I was always looking at the wrong guy, because I could take it back to Jesus and go, "Oh, well, it's Jesus. It's the Son of God. It's where the thing originated." And the more I started to study it, the more I realized that, oh, it's Paul. Unless you're Catholic, then that in that case it's Peter. But Paul is the guy. Paul is really the guy who was the L. Ron Hubbard of the Christian faith, where if you get any kind of study outside of the King James only background, where they're going to keep you believing that any kind of text that's not in the King James, that's not the received text, is corrupted for some reason, and it comes from the Catholic Church. Even though, again, like I said, they accept the Peter story, and so they that's their thought stoppers that they use, is to stop you. You don't need to learn the Greek and the Hebrew. God put it in English. And that even the story going back to the Tower of Babel, even that, it always bothered me, because here God had the power to confound the language, but he didn't have the power to put it all back so that he can get his story out. He had to wait
Right.
2,000 years after his kid died to then have this king translated into one language, because that's going to be the world language, because he knew that ahead of time. So that was always the story of, why it
Yeah.
was preserved.
Why didn't he just have it written in English 2,000 years ago and just sit around? And then when it got to English, we'd be like, holy crap.
Yeah, just have everybody speak the same language again.
Yeah.
Uh, But, yeah, so that's kinda how they stop you from getting any kind of, outside knowledge, and once I started to then learn how how the Bible was written,
I like that one.
and
The Bibble. It's the Bibble.
yes, even learning, I didn't know that it didn't begin to be written down until, 60 years after the guy died. It wasn't written by any eyewitnesses. There were none of the people who were around Jesus propagated the religion. That always bothered me. That was one of the things that even got me to look into it. It was just that whole transition of Old Testament to New Testament, how we have this God that doesn't change. And then yet he just switches up the whole thing and decides to transition it over, and the crazy thing is that in the Old Testament, there was always an unbroken line. It always was God, and God gave it to Moses, and God gave it to the prophets, and God gave it to these people. Then it suddenly there's this transition, and then you got God's son Jesus, and he's taken over things. He forgot to tell everybody that this is his plan and that he was transitioning over because there's this whole group of people that got missed out on it. And that really, I think, bothered me how this transition happens, but there's not like this direct transfer of power where everybody's in on it. It's just this guy shows up and shakes everything up. But once I started to learn, though, about those things about the Bible and how the authors are anonymous of the New Testament Gospels, the order that they were written in, the sources, and how a lot of them are copied from one another. And the biggest piece for me, I think, was learning that John was kind of tacked on to the end. And John is the one gospel where all of God's power comes from, where Jesus claims to be God.
John is superhero Jesus.
Yeah, and you would think that that would be in all of them if that was the case. If
There's way more spectacular things in John than in any of the
Yeah,
other ones.
that always bothered me too, is when I finally started to really look into it, and I just remember just having these, nagging thoughts in the back of my head about why there wasn't more about the apostles. You would think that these 12 dudes that followed him around everywhere and witnessed all of this stuff firsthand would then, immediately wanna spread it, and instead, it's just the one guy. It's just Peter. Peter's the only guy, and then he meets this guy, Paul, and then, again, Paul, it's like I struggled to vet Paul, when his experience is Joseph Smith's experience, where he gets knocked in the head, he sees a bright light, and then all of a sudden, he has a miraculous conversion, and that I think was when it finally clicked to me that, like, "Oh, this isn't any different, that I can treat my own religion the way I've treated everybody else's religion and view it in an objective way and be able to take it for what it is." And then again, the more that I dove in, the more I found that the Old Testament is not as old as I thought that it was. That it's kind of a false story where people are trying to place themselves in a place and a time where they didn't really exist in that area, and so they're trying to kind of create a history and a story, and they're just mimicking the same origins stories from the people that were around them, that were before them, that they were familiar with. And once I've started to put it together in a historical manner, it kinda all fell into place, and then it was very quick after that. So, I had this 10 years of time where I wasn't in church, and I think that really helped because to keep you in it, you gotta constantly be indoctrinated. It's a process. It's a constant process that's happening.
They gotta treat the questions like whack-a-mole. Like,
Yeah.
question pops up, whack it down. Just whack it down.
Yeah.
And if you're not there to whack the questions down, the questions just keep popping up.
Yep,
And
and that's why they have to create fear that if you leave, that something bad will happen. I remember in the church that we were in that I left from, they talked about because our the that's kind of an interesting story. I don't know if you've heard about Bobby, the a pastor named Bobby Leonard. He was recently notorious about 2 years ago. There was a video that surfaced of him preaching and basically saying that girls who dress in a modern way and then get assaulted, that if he was on the jury, he would let the guy go because of the way that the girls dress, which is a really odd thing to do when
uh,
that's not how that works.
that is, yeah, that's not how that should work. Like, that's not justice at all. That's just straight up misogyny.
Yep, and so that church, that he sent out our pastor to be missionaries to these. people. So that that's the background of the kinds of churches that I was in. And it's interesting because you hear about these people, you hear about these hate preachers, and when I think back on it, I think, well, I wasn't really exposed to that a whole lot. A lot of the churches that I was in were really reasonable. And then thinking about it, it's like, no, honestly, it's a system where my pastor might not have preached those sorts of things from the pulpit, but we would have evangelists that would come in. So you would have these traveling preachers that would come, and they would just live off of the offerings that people would give. And they would come in and they would espouse these kinds of views. And so you would be exposed to it that way. And then the pastor of the church could, pass it off and go, well, that's not what we believe. That's not what I preach. But the message still gets around to the kinds of people who like that sort of message. It's something that even though it wasn't preached directly in the churches that I was in, I still was exposed to it because there was no way that any pastor is going to stand up and say, "Hey, cut that out. Stop saying that nonsense." And so they kind of vetted that sort of behavior. That's kind of how I got into. I think a lot of the like science things too. We were really into Kent Hovind. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him,
I'm
Dr.
very
Dino.
familiar. I'm very familiar with Kent Hovind and everything that goes along with him. Everything from his convictions for tax evasion and to his convictions for spousal assault.
I actually got to. I've had the displeasure of hearing him live. So he came to our church, and I do remember that too. Because I grew up believing that dinosaurs were made up, that they were manufactured to go along with the millions of years and the evolution story, and they were meant to discredit religion and the creation story. And so I remember struggling with that too, being a very smart kid. And then when he came around, there were answers for the things that the questions that we had, and he married the dinosaurs back into the story so that it was okay because evidence that great, you can't just, it doesn't stay buried forever. Uh,
He gives a justification that is just enough for people to let
yeah,
them assuage their questions and be like, okay,
correct.
there's an
It
answer
it
now.
it sounds intelligent when you initially hear it if you don't know what questions to ask.
Right.
And it was enough to overcome those nagging things that I had in the back of my mind where I was able to let that go. Even when I went to high school though, where I grew up in Florida, my biology teacher was a Baptist. And so when it came time to learn about evolution in public school, I actually didn't learn it because he basically said, this is the bare minimum that I have to teach. You have to pass these tests. And so it basically became like open book where he's not really going to teach it to you as if it's a fact. He's just going to teach it to you enough to get you through the test. So it was a huge disservice to me
And every
to
other
go
child.
through that. Yes, because I finally had my opportunity to get outside truth, and I didn't get it. It was allowed to happen in a public school, which is the saddest part. But that was another thing that was crazy for me that I did not experience. But I found that the people in my church and in my faith that I grew up in, they just have this complex for persecution. They just want to be persecuted so badly,
Well,
and
Jesus
I
tells
just
them they're going to be.
Oh, yeah. And I didn't experience that at all in the public school that I went to. I carried a Bible. I was in 3 Christian clubs in my school. There a lot of the teachers and leaders were Christian people. So I did not struggle at all when it came to being able to exercise my faith. Never got bullied or anything like that. It was great because I was able to in some classes, I do remember I had a teacher that would challenge me, and I always had a real deep respect for her, even though I knew that politically we were complete opposites. I was very, very conservative and she was very liberal. And I remember when I would spout things off that I was taught, she would push back on it, and she would want me to be able to articulate why I believed the things that I believed, and not just take it at face value because I was told that. And it took me a while to figure it out, to figure out that that's what she was trying to do. And she was just a very amazing person. She actually passed away of cancer about a decade ago. But she was one of the most influential people in my life growing up because she taught me that I was okay for me to think for myself. I didn't have to just think the things that were handed down to me, that I could question things and ask why am I being told this? Why am I believing this? And she did it in a way that she wasn't trying to get me off of my faith. She wasn't trying to push me away from the things that I believed, but she wanted me to at least have a reason for it and not just, repeat the things that I was told about it.
That's one of the most important things, lessons to learn in life is like to question your own beliefs. Like, why do I believe this? Do I have a really good reason for believing this, or do I just
Right.
believe it because I was told it?
Yeah, and that was something that was very impactful because I didn't always get that response in the church.
Church doesn't want you asking questions. So, least of all, why? Don't ask the why question. They don't want you to answer that because the answer to that from the church and from religion generally is always God. God did it. That's what
Yeah,
wants
and
it.
I remember we participated in Awana program, and Awana, they teach you, it's kind of like they model the Boy Scouts programs and how you like rank up, and you get patches, you earn patches, you memorize scripture. A lot of it is based on scripture memory. But I remember if I heard things from my teachers that made no sense, I would openly say, "Hey, that this doesn't make sense. Why is it this way? Why wouldn't it be this way?" And I remember getting into trouble for that. That one teacher would not promote me when I had promotions that were due. When I had earned badges, they wouldn't give me badges. And then being homeschooled, I was in the same grade as my older brother, and we always did the class divisions by grade and not age. And so this one leader didn't like that I pushed back on him so much, and so he went to the pastor and convinced the pastor that they should make an exception for me because I was obviously not mature enough to, be in the same class as my older brother, even though I totally had an understanding of that, grade level and everything. But
Don't
it,
ask
it
questions. Don't ask me these questions. I don't want to deal with
yeah.
the answers. Let's put this. Get the kid out of here.
Yep, and that I think that also really helped because it helped me see that not everybody is genuine about it, that they have things to hide, that they purposely don't want. Because I do remember, for whatever reason, I was not really into like apologists and apologist content. I never really liked C.S. Lewis, or when I read the Screw Tape Letters, I wasn't really impressed by what was in it. It didn't really seem compelling to me, and I think Kent Hovind would probably be the first guy that you could call an apologist that I would have been exposed to, where
And that's taking it really loosely. Like, Hovind Hovind is his own thing. There are a lot of some of the worst apologists I've heard of would like take themselves to say Kent Hovind is crazy. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
and that was one area too where I think, I didn't even accept everything that he said at face value, and, that really helped to deconstruct me quite a bit, was looking into the claims. I remember, looking into, I'm gonna forget his name now, the chariot wheel guy, uh,
oh, Ron Wyatt.
Ron Wyatt, yep,
Ron,
and all the claims of Ron Wyatt, and, when I even did a precursory look into it, it falls apart so quickly that it's like, "Man, I cannot believe it's still being quoted."
that dude found everything, man. He found all
Oh,
of
yeah.
this stuff.
Oh, he found the mercy seat, he found the ark.
Ark. He found Noah's Ark. Supposedly, he knew where the Ark of the Covenant was,
Yeah, yeah.
and he found these chariot wheels at the bottom.
He found Indiana Jones.
But he never found anything. Like, anything he looked into falls apart within seconds with
Oh, yeah.
any kind of scrutiny. But the people who want to believe, they
Mhm.
want it to be real.
Yeah, I think that's something that it just reminds me 'cause, when we finally did get a TV, we were really into the X-Files. My dad was really into UFOs, and, I distinctly remember, obviously, the "I Wanna Believe" poster that is so
Mhm.
prominent in Mulder's office,
Yep.
and I think people miss the point of that, and the point of the show, I think, is missed a lot in that, it's about confirmation bias. It's about coming up with things that aren't there because you want to believe. You want to believe so bad that you're going to make the thing real. And I think people kind of miss that and think of it in a more conspiratorial manner, like, oh, this is some, insight. Oh, I want to believe because I know there's more to the story that's underneath. And it's like, yeah, no, that's not really what the guy was going for. He was a lot smarter.
There's no reason to jump into the deep into the conspiracy well when you just want to believe it.
Right.
And
Yep. You're
I don't see any reason for jumping into the conspiracy well much at all, period. But that's because there's real stuff to actually be angry about.
Oh, yeah. It's really important too, just going back on the education thing, because I think the last kind of piece to my deconstruction was just science in general. We were always, my dad was a big UFO person, big into spirits and ghosts, and my take was very literal on the Bible. And so I really struggled with the spiritual because the things that I experienced in the world didn't line up with the spiritual. And I never really had spiritual experiences. And so it really helped when I learned about things like infrasound. Infrasound is just a very low frequency that's below what we can audibly hear, but we can feel it. And they've discovered that it gives us this sense of unease and fear. A lot of times it can be felt naturally. There's just a frequency that can be given off by certain rocks, or if you're near places that have like generators. It explains the things that I'd experienced when I was younger, that we were like, oh, that's a demonic presence. Oh, this is a demonic feeling. Oh, this place has this, demonic spirit to it. And it's like, oh no, that's a scientific thing. It can be explained. And it's something that's so effective that they started using it in horror films. When they get to key moments, they'll
Yep.
play this frequency and it gives you this sense of fear.
Hit
Um,
this hit the subwoofers with the real deep rumble
yes.
that shakes the seats a little bit in the theater, but
Mhm.
really it doesn't hit our ears. We just feel it.
Yes. Yep. And then learning about sleep paralysis, I had two very prominent sleep paralysis experiences, and being religious, you're gonna just apply what you are told. And I remember, thinking that, oh, there's an oppressive evil spirit. It must be something in my life that I'm missing that needs to be
Just a
dealt with.
chemical block.
Yep. And when somebody finally explained in a very scientific manner that, oh, this is a physical experience that you have, and it's the same for everybody because everybody's body is doing the same thing. I applied it immediately, and it's like that sort of fell off.
When we're asleep, our brain becomes active during REM because it's sorting memories. But the
Yep.
prefrontal cortex doesn't know that it's asleep. It thinks all of this stuff is happening. So it's sending signals as if we're awake and active. Without that chemical block, the body gets up and starts doing the things that you're doing in your dream, which is one of the things that causes somnambulism, which is sleepwalking.
Oh yeah.
People
Mhm.
like, there's 2 sides of that. Like, typically, people don't have to worry about it. Like, you go to sleep, the chemical block doesn't
Yep.
goes during REM sleep, and then once the REM's done, it lifts and things like that. Once we wake up, it's completely gone, and we're fine. Sometimes the chemical block doesn't stay in place, and we get up and move around during our dreams. Sometimes the chemical block doesn't get lifted, and we become conscious with it still there.
Yep.
And that's what the sleep paralysis is, like, it's just hasn't turned off yet. It usually does within a minute or 2, but during that time period where you literally can't move anything, it can be terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you believe in spirits and demons. It really heightens it quite a bit. Now I haven't had an experience with it since, I've deconstructed, but I've kinda wondered what that will be like, knowing that, I can explain what's happening to me, if it will be a lot less of a fear response, 'cause it does happen at it's a transitional period in my sleep usually when I'm shifting from one cycle to another. A lot of times I can detect a nightmare type feeling, and I try to wake myself, and then that's a lot of times the problem is I'm trying to wake myself out of the dream, and I woke my head and not my body.
Mhm. Yeah, as it can it's a chemical block, it can take a little while to neutralize.
Yeah, yeah. But, once I was able to have explanations for that, and then learning about the Fox sisters really really sent it home for me. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
No.
So this was in the late 1800s. These 3 sisters, discovered that they could, essentially make sounds with their toes. They could, like, rap on wood, and so for, uh, April Fools, they decided to prank their parents and said that there was a ghost in their house and that, an apple came tumbling down the stairs, and, they tricked them into thinking that the house was haunted, and they went and told other people in the town, and it spread, and the sisters were kinda like, "Okay, what do we do now? Are we gonna keep the ruse up, or are we gonna let everybody know that we're just making this up?" And they kept the ruse up, and it started the whole spiritualism, mediums, all of that spiritual movement that happened, around the turn of the century. They started doing seances and different things like that, and eventually it got to the point where one of the sisters, decided that, she had had enough of this. She couldn't do it anymore. Her conscience got to her, and she booked a theater, and people bought tickets, sold out, and she gave up all of the secrets, said, "We've been making this up since we were children. We This is how we do it. This is how we wrap our toes to make these sounds." And they kind of came up with cold reading and the concept of cold reading, and the people turned on them. The people were very upset because they had gotten to believe that they could contact their loved ones who had died and passed on to some other realm, and they were more upset that she was spoiling that for them, and she died, basically an alcoholic, destitute, and had regretted that her life had been this lie where they duped all of these people, and her sisters became rich off of it, and it's crazy how the lie can get so big that even the truth won't fix it.
There are people who are gonna refuse to believe the contrary to what they've already been taught, and that's because of the cognitive dissonance, like, that which is
Yeah,
that danger signal that, like, the thing you're telling me is not real, like, that to me is
yeah,
like, that is danger. If you're telling me that that's not real and the danger's not real, I can't believe you because
yeah.
it could still be dangerous. It's when we let go of that idea that it's dangerous that the cognitive dissonance can lift.
Oh, yeah.
There.
Yeah, it's funny 'cause a lot of times you hear these things that in the religion, and they're supposed to be very clever sounding, and the one that always got me was, the greatest lie that Satan ever told, was that he didn't exist, convincing people he didn't exist, and that to me, that didn't seem clever at all. Personally, I would think that the greatest lie that Satan would ever pull is convincing people that he was God and that nothing that he did was wrong. To me, that would be the bigger the bigger ruse,
That would be a really big ooze.
but I think that science was the last thing that kind of washed the last bit away, and it took a little bit for me to come to a place where I could accept the filthy A word, atheist. And, when I finally came to understand what that meant and even how maligned what I was taught an atheist was in the religious background that I had and what atheism actually means, it's a completely different thing, and, I think that was finally the point where I came to accept that, "Oh, no, this describes me. I can accept this label. This isn't a bad thing. This is something that it's okay to ascribe to." And it's a lot better knowing that the truth about what it is and what it means, that it's not the things that I was told, that it's just the answer to one question. Are you convinced that God exists? And I'm not convinced. I used to be convinced, and I'm not anymore. And I've I really enjoyed John. I can't think
John
of his
John
last
Cohen.
Cohen.
John
Thank
Cohen.
you.
Yeah.
Yes, and I, just pre-ordered his book, actually, Unconvinced. Just him talking about recently about how you don't choose what you believe. But you're either convinced of something or you're not. That really, I think, was the thing that finally really hit home for me, that, that it's not something that I never was given that experience. Like I said, my parents had a conversion moment where they made a decision to convert to the religion, but I never really had that. Yeah, I had a salvation experience because that's part of being in the faith. You get to a certain age and you have to have a salvation experience or you're not one of us. But it wasn't, again, it was just a fact.
You're not a
Yeah.
true Scotsman without that salvation.
Right. But it wasn't even a thing that I had a chance to even question, it not being true. But just thinking about how I was raised, I would, because I wasn't raised to believe in Santa Claus. That wasn't, part of our faith background. And Santa was, this ploy again by the world to steer people away from the true story of Jesus and to commercialize everything. And so I never had a belief in Santa. I was never taught about it. Luckily, I didn't grow up around other kids that did, because I probably would have ruined it for them. But it was just interesting to think about it in that manner and to think about how, once a kid who is taught to believe in Santa Claus gets to that point where it's no longer convincing, they cannot return to that state where they believed again. And if somebody does, that's called delusion, and they make a movie called The Santa Claus, and that's the whole point of the kid in the movie is that he's supposedly delusional of this thing. I think we could learn a lot if more people knew that. If more people knew the very specific things that you cannot change that are just immutable facts about people, and that I think it's so harmful because you just my brother-in-law is a person who's gay. It was never accepted. It's another one of those things where it's like you don't get to choose that. Just like you don't choose what you believe, you don't choose what your sexuality is. It just is what it is, and you can fight it or you can accept it. And that's another big part I think that really kind of pushed me out was getting to the point where I understood that, oh, these are just immutable facts about people, and that you can't hold a position, you can't hold a bigoted position towards people, if your God created them that way. It was something that I knew that, my brother-in-law was gay when he was about 12 years old. It was just something that I knew, and I remember telling my wife that, and it was very upsetting because that wasn't something that was okay. So it would bother her when I would say that, but I think it helped in the long run to come to accept it, that it's just a fact that these are things that just happen that are part of nature that, you can't treat people differently for. And that was actually one of the better experiences that I had, even when I was still in the faith, is coming to that realization that my brother-in-law did not want to have a relationship with our family because of the beliefs that we held. And he felt that we would have a bigoted position because our beliefs were bigoted beliefs. I remember getting to a point where I knew it was very important that we let him know that we didn't feel that way. That even though we were in this faith that had these very bigoted point of views, we didn't hold those. And I was able to reach out to him. I wrote him an email and basically told him, "Hey, I know you haven't come out to the family yet, but you don't have to come out to us because we know already." And I told him I knew that you were gay from the time that you were a boy. He just had the characteristics that you can tell there again, it's just immutable properties that people have. And we had no ill will or feelings in our hearts towards him, and that we didn't have that point of view at all. And that we would rather that he have a relationship with our kids as an uncle than to, hold to our faith so strongly that we would make that be a relational problem. That was, I think, one of the biggest reliefs even when I was still in it, was to let that part go. And it's crazy how I keep coming back to this thing where you get so brainwashed that you just identify with these people, even though your beliefs, even though your morals don't line up with them. It's so hard to like break away from that. And I guess, like I said, that last part is like that, accepting that label of atheist and being able to fully come to terms with it. But even breaking away from like the political side of things and understanding that like that your beliefs drive your politics, and I didn't have those beliefs, but I still maintain those politics and maintain that identity with those people. And it's just that last little bit of like brainwashing that like holds on where it took me a while to realize that, and maybe that's what it was when I woke up that day where I maybe my brain just finally got to the part where that cognitive dissonance wasn't there anymore. And I realized that I don't align with these people anymore. Why am I going to a place where I feel uncomfortable because these people hate people that I love? And they would not want me to have a relationship with my brother-in-law. They would not want my brother-in-law to have a relationship with my children. Why do I want to go and be around these kinds of people? Why would I want to be around people that have views that I don't hold? And again, I guess it's just that kind of snowball effect. It's not one thing that happened. You know, a lot of people have that atheist experience of somebody backstabbed them, somebody did something that was hurtful to them, so they cheated on their partner, cheated on them with somebody. Or I didn't really have that experience. Mine was it was very slow. It was very slow and methodical, and then it happened all at once. It was like very
That's the thing. Almost nobody that leaves the church leaves to become atheist. It leaves because of church hurt.
yeah.
Church hurt is something that causes people to leave specific church locations, and it might turn into, I hate God, but if you hate God, you're convinced there's a God there to hate,
Right. Yep. Yep.
so you're not an atheist. You're just not that type of Christian anymore, not that
Yeah.
type of Muslim anymore. Like whatever belief you have, you're still a theist or at least a deist because you still believe in God. But most atheists don't, and the vast majority of them start the journey in a very similar way to you, in that something changed socially. A
Mm,
big social shift happened, which allowed you to start asking questions. Now,
yeah.
for you, it was a slower, method of opening up to that because you were still in other indoctrinated in other areas, still
Yep.
pulled into that, but as as you grew, and then when you decided, like, you just weren't comfortable in that church anymore, so you stopped going, again, that allowed just a lot more openness to asking questions, and then
Mhm.
because you were asking questions and the people keeping you, in the dark weren't the ones answering anymore,
Yeah.
that's when you started being able to open up and find new things, be convinced by new things. I agree with John Cohen. We can't choose our own beliefs, but we can choose the media that we absorb. We can choose what channels we're going to watch. We can choose what information we take in. And for many conservatives and traditionalists, they block off, this is what I'm allowed to watch.
Yeah.
This is what I'm
Yep.
allowed to consume. Everything outside of that, keep it away. I don't want it. And they very
That
rarely deviate out of that.
that's definitely what I gravitated towards, and it was crazy because again, even after leaving the church and not being, in it and as dedicated as I was, I mean, I gave 10% of my income and offerings on top of that, and I gave time. I was always there. And I when I left the church, I gravitated towards, people that were had Christian backgrounds, Officer Tatum, Tim Pool, a lot of these, like, right-wing conservative people, and it was just something that was familiar to me, and, that was kind of the last thing that, like, fell off was, just coming to the realization that, "Oh, this is just these people are just rage baiting. This is people who wanna hear the same things, they wanna be soothed. They wanna be confirmed in the things that they believe, and then I started to s watch outside people, because I never watched any atheist content creator until after I gotten to the point where I was like, "Okay, I'm definitely an atheist at this point." So that there was no kind of conversion thing there where, "Oh, the evil atheists were out to get me." I kinda stumbled on them accidentally.
All the atheist proselytizers going door to door. Have you heard good that there is no Christ? I've never had one of those come to my door, not ever. I've had Jehovah's Witness come to my door. I've had
Okay.
some Muslim. We don't have a lot in the area that I live, but I've had it happen at least once.
Yeah.
It dropped off a watchtower from time to time, and I was like, "No, no, thank you," and we move on. But I've never had an atheist come up to the door and "Do you wanna convert to atheism?" Like, generally don't.
Yeah, that's definitely a good thing. I lived in Arizona for a little while, and I when I was had left the church, I had a close friend that was a former Jehovah's Witness and some former Mormons, and we would joke around that we were part of the former religio support group. But it's interesting, just what like you were saying earlier about the different sects and why they choose not to have TV and how different groups pick and choose what they are allowed. I remember having conversations with him about Jehovah's Witnesses and because we knew, there's no birthdays, no holidays, but they were allowed to drink and dance, and that to us was, like,
Mhm.
crazy 'cause dancing and drinking were forbidden, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's kinda interesting to get that perspective, and it was eye-opening too to find out all that I was wrong about other people's religions, things that I was told about what Jehovah's Witnesses believe, and because we always had to, answer back. That was kind of the Baptist thing, and the IFB specifically was, that we always had our Bible, and we always could answer to, doctrinal things that where we varied, and so we were taught a lot about what other groups believe, but then once you talk to them you find out that a lot of that is also misnomers in the same way that the things that they believe about atheists are not at all accurate.
A lot of them don't even know what the actual definition of atheist is. Like, most of them
Yeah.
that are, that come up with it, that they you say there is no God. Like, no. And
No, it's not
that's a very specific type of atheist, but generally, atheist is just someone who is not convinced that there is a God.
yeah.
Some people take the stance that there isn't one, like hard, positive, there is no God, and other people are just like, "I don't know." I personally from that camp, I don't know. There are some specific iterations that I will say that God doesn't exist.
Use it.
The God of the Bible, the God of the Quran, the God of the Talmud, that God cannot exist because all of those texts have complete contradictions of just the nature of what the being would be. And there's so many other contradictions within them, you can't trust them for any kind of factual information.
Right.
And they're the claim. So I'm not going to take that as just the fact, whatever it
Yes.
says in the book. I wanted to touch back on a big theme that came up a bunch early on, and that was the idea of guilt. And I know like guilt is a big thing, especially in Christianity. Uh, Catholics, there's a just a famous thing. Catholic guilt is just a thing that
Oh, yeah.
it's a meme essentially
Yes.
in media. It's like, oh, I'm just carrying around that Catholic guilt. And I think, like, to me, the guilt often stems out of the fact that the very basic premise, the most underlying premise of the entire religion is that you're worthless.
Yes. I'm a filthy, rotten sinner. Yep. Yeah, that, I actually, I got sidetracked. I was starting to tell a story, and then I got a little sidetracked, but, the church that I was in Arizona, that was a story that we were told of a real person, so this is a real person that existed. This is a factual story. This isn't just a made up thing, but, there was a guy at the church, and he, had a bowling league, and it met on Wednesdays, and so he decided that he was going to stop going to the midweek service because two times on Sunday, in the morning and the evening isn't enough. You got to have a midweek service as well. But he just didn't want to go to that one, and so he started bowling instead. And he worked at a furniture factory, and wouldn't you know it, had an accident, lopped off his bowling hand. And immediately he knew that it was God and he came right back into church. And that was a story that was told to us of a real person that happened to. And they actually believed that God would cut somebody's hand off because he wanted to go bowling and not go to church 3 times a week. But it's those that's the kind of guilt and fear that you get instilled into you that that's just the way that is. It's not there's no other way to view that, and so you gotta constantly think about the decisions that you make because are you going to do something, that will lead to you getting your hand chopped off and an accident at work.
So during your deconstruction and whatnot, how have you, if you have at all, been able to reconcile that guilt? What have you done with it?
I think, for me, I think the big thing was coming to the realization that there's nothing to worry about once I deconstructed from the hell concept. I think that was probably the biggest thing that helped make a lot of that guilt kind of dissuade a bit because if there's no punishment for it, then why do I got to feel bad about it? I guess is kind of my take. Because you're told that the punishment is so severe that you got to have a reason. And there's the IFB faith specifically too. Their thought crimes are a big part of that. We're taught that if you even think about a woman inappropriately, you've committed adultery in your mind. You're just as bad as an adulterer. If you hate somebody, then that's just as bad as murder. So there is a that very deep ingrained guilt, and don't even get me started on things like self pleasure. Um,
Yeah.
that story bothered me when the Onan story, and when I read that, I'm like, that's not the way you describe that is not what I read in this story. That's a completely different thing.
All ways of controlling what we do.
It was very bad for my wife, because my wife started out in that one church, where that preacher was a very radical preacher, and she had problems with adult acne, and so they convinced her that you must be vain, you must have some problem with vanity, and so God is applying this to you as a punishment, which is horrible. She's absolutely not that person. She's the least vain person I've ever met in my entire life. But that guilt just like weighed on her so much that she would constantly go through, these tormenting periods where she would try to think of things that she was doing and then she would stop doing things that were helpful to her, things that made her feel good about herself, like wearing makeup. She would not want to wear makeup because that would be vain, but being able to wear the makeup and to be able to hide some of the adult acne would have helped her and helped her self-esteem and helped her feel better about herself. But that
Mhm.
that guilt just kind of stuck with her. But for me, I've been just kind of trying to reframe things and view myself. My dad was not a very good dad, and even he today will admit that he wasn't a very good father. And there was a lot of physical abuse. The spanking was a big thing. That was an appropriate punishment in our house. And it delved all spanking is abuse, is child abuse. But it
I
would
I
go
will
from
I'd actually push a little bit further than that and say that all punishment is abuse. Because punishment is a very specific thing. And punishment is something that's attempting to dissuade a repeated behavior.
yeah.
Inside, if it's not trying to stop behaviors from happening again, it's not punishment.
Right. Mhm.
So just because we've done something, we want to apply punishment to keep that from happening again. If I can't ever do that again, what I'm doing isn't what I'm getting in response to that. The consequence isn't punishment. But
Mm.
also, one of the most important things about that is that punishment doesn't work. And we've
Right.
been studying punishment since the 1930s and 40s with a guy named B.F. Skinner. He's known as the father of modern behaviorism. And he looked into punishment and reinforcement, and he found that punishment, attempting to make a behavior not happen again,
Mm.
does not do anything. It doesn't dissuade the behavior from happening. It just makes the person or animal take it covert,
Right.
right? We
Yeah.
we just hide it. If I'm training a dog and we want to potty train the dog, and you punish it for peeing inside, it's not going to not pee inside again. It's just pee somewhere else.
Yeah. Then you always can't see.
Yeah, punish it again. It's going to find some place you can't find it to pee. It's not going to make the behavior go away. It's just going to make it go covert. And this is a fundamental thing about human psychology. Punishment is just harmful because it's just going to make us go covert with our behaviors and start questioning ourselves, build up this guilt This sense of guilt, this sense of massive, like, I'm terrible, I'm wrong, it devalues us because
Yep.
somebody else is devaluing us by doing
Right.
that. If we want to see behavior, like a behavior not happen again, we have to reinforce a different behavior, make a different behavior replace that one. We see this in schools and things all the time. It, we also promote the pro-social behavior. When I was potty training my dog to go outside, we just made a big deal of it when we had her out, right? When she's out on the yard and she pottied, woo, it was a big deal. We made a huge deal of it. And that made her want to do that more. And so when she got to the point where like that's just where she goes, it's like she knows that's where I'm supposed to go.
Yeah.
I don't get the same treatment if I do it inside. So I want to do it outside. And
Mm.
that's how even human psychology works. The more we're reinforced, the more we change to those pro-social
Yeah.
behaviors. But punishment just doesn't work. You'd think that an all-knowing God would know how he designed the human mind to work,
He would know the psychology. Yeah.
which says to me, like, if he existed and he insists on all these punishments, he's just
Mm.
cruel because
Right.
that's all it is torture. And that's all
Eh,
the hell doctrine is just torture. It's not
yes.
punishment because you're already dead. You can't do anything anymore. Can't dissuade the future behaviors because you're dead and you're in there for eternity. This is why it's just torture, which means it's just bad. So all
Yeah.
of these ideas, and you mentioned the thought crimes. Like your limbic system is beyond your conscious control. You can no more not have a sexual thought about a person you find attractive than you can not be hungry ever again.
Right.
Right? It's just gonna happen. It's a part of your system that you have no conscious control over. What matters is how you act on it. But the churches want to control your thinking so they
Ye
can control those desires because they're the ones who have the key to it. Right? You want to have sex? You want to really do that? Get married here.
Yep.
And then we can control your family unit. And then you can do all the things you
Yeah.
want. But you got to do it our way.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think that helped me deal with the guilt a lot, 'cause I always had a problem with the concept of the Garden of Eden and original sin just to begin with. It makes no sense that you would punish people for gaining the knowledge of good and evil. How could they know that they were doing something wrong? That's the thing that I never could really consolidate, was how you could punish people that were truly innocent, innocent to the point where they just knew that God told them not to do something. But if they don't have the knowledge of right and wrong, then they don't have the ability to make that choice.
And it's all a setup too. He made the fruit tempting. He
Right.
made it more tempting than any of the other fruits. So of course they had to draw their attention and they didn't know it was wrong. I maintain that he didn't want them to eat that fruit because it would have let them realize that he was a bad person.
Oh, yeah. Well, he even says it when he's talking to the other gods that are in the story, that they're gonna be like us. And why is that such a bad problem? Again, it's like, what's so wrong with you that you don't want them to be like you?
And if they ate from the tree of life and became immortal, because they weren't before that, then he wouldn't have any control over them. He'd lose all control completely because he couldn't kill them.
Mhm, and it was always confusing anyway because, the whole free will, no free will thing was very confusing, and he created us so that we could have free will because the angels we were told that the angels didn't have free will, but I don't know how they didn't have free will. If Lucifer was able to rebel and take a third of the angels with him, then that would indicate to me that they had free will, so it gets a little confusing.
What's a third of infinity?
You're right, yeah.
Because that the heavenly host is an infinite. It's a countless number, infinite number. How do you take a third of infinity?
But I do remember, thinking about that, just that concept of Adam and Eve being truly innocent and then being punished and just kinda knowing that even though the story is not true, that it has that deep-rooted, sense inside of me, and that's where that guilt kind of derives from. So thinking about it in a context of correctness of that's a bad thing that a bad God did to some people, and so I shouldn't have to take on any sort of guilt or guilty feelings. That I think that sort of helped me, and then just the longer that it goes that, you realize that it's just a myth, that it's
Just
just
the
stories.
just a
Yeah,
story.
then it is a lot easier to have the rest of it fall away. I do remember specifically, telling my wife that, I have a potty mouth in my head. I use the F word constantly, and I have been taught to be polite in conversation, so I'm not, speaking completely, because I know this is gonna possibly be in the internet. And so, but I use the F word constantly to describe things in my head, and so to me, if these were thought crimes that I was gonna have to pay for, why am I being this person in my head that I'm not? And to me, I think it would be better to be an honest person, and so I told my wife, The potty mouth is coming out. I'm sorry, this is just who I am. If you have a problem with it, we can maybe discuss it, maybe put a cuss jar together." But again, my wife is a very reasonable person, and she was like, "Yeah, that sounds like a very reasonable point of view to have. Uh, let's not be fake people. Let's be the people we truly are."
Oh, one of my favorite, things about, like, if you're trying to not cuss as much, one of my
Mhm.
favorites actually comes from a movie with Eugene Levy and Sam Jackson. I can't remember what the name of it was off the top of my head, but, Sam Jackson always famous for his potty mouth in all these movies, and they leaned into that. Eugene Levy, always very kinda like straight-laced
Oh,
type of
yeah.
character, so his character tries to teach Sam Jackson's character, like, how to not cuss by adding crying out loud after he says "fuck."
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, "Fuck," crying out loud, and then it's just like, say it faster and comes together, and it's just, "For crying out loud," and you now replace your thing, and that's kind of a like, I like that one because it's a little wholesome, but also it's don't punish yourself for saying that, just replace it with a new behavior.
Yeah.
That one works a lot more, and that's the kinda thing, like, don't do a swear jar.
And I think, it was awesome because we ended up, settling on, because we didn't wanna teach our kids that there are bad words, and so we just taught them that there are adult words, and there's certain things that you can't drink until you're an adult, and there's certain words that you don't say until you're an adult. So we didn't wanna give bad connotations to the words, we just wanted to show that, certain things are appropriate behavior when you're at a certain age, and that's not appropriate when you're a kid. And going back to what you were saying about coping with the guilt, I think coming to the realization that I didn't turn out to be the dad that my father was to my kids, knowing that I was able to raise them in a more fact-based reality, and to allow them to make those choices that where I didn't put it on them when 3 of I have 4 boys and 3 of them are in high school, and, they told me, "Hey, we joined this Bible club. We wanted to, just see what this Bible thing was all about," and that's not a problem, and I encouraged them to ask questions, and they did, and none of them have joined any of the faiths as far as I'm aware, um, but they asked me a lot of things about, what they were told and what I believed and what I was told when I was growing up, and it's a lot more heartening to me to see them be able to not have a fear of asking questions and not have that just to be unencumbered with that weight, to be able to just go, "Oh, this doesn't make sense to me, and so I'm just going to ask," because the smartest thing to do is to, gain more knowledge, and it's important that that knowledge be based in reality. So it was really cool to see them, not necessarily just believe what they're being told, and ask questions for why things are the way that they are, and to see them have that ability to think for themselves. It makes me feel good to know that that's the one thing that I can take away from being a father. It's that I taught my kids how to think for themselves.
I think that creating an environment where kids, especially, can feel free to ask any questions they have without fear of judgment or negative judgment is the best thing you can do for a kid, and that's what promotes critical thinking is
Yeah.
being able to ask questions, being able to know that you're not going to get negatively judged for asking those questions, even if they seem stupid.
Yeah.
I always say the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. Ask your questions. I love asking questions. Jake, I think this has been a phenomenal conversation. I've really enjoyed your story. I think viewers are going to really enjoy your story. And for those of you who've been watching this video, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. And please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Just remember one thing: the word beard has an archaic verb form. It means to challenge with boldness and confidence, and often effrontery. So beard well and beard with empathy. I'll see you guys in the next one.